All right, good morning and welcome to week 8 in NETD2202. I decided to create a video for this week's Monday classes in order to make it asynchronous, and this will allow you to pause the video, stop the video, go through the video, and have a class ready that we are going to use in future classes. So what we're going to do is go through and review classes once again. We're going to create a new class. This time we're going to choose Stormtroopers from the Star Wars universe. And we're going to create forums in the future around the Stormtroopers and around that kind of information. And so we're going to start with the class itself. And that's where we're going to go from there. All right, so we're going to start off with, first of all, getting myself in here. So we're going to go ahead and start a brand new project. So as per normal, I'm going to go ahead and add a new project. We are going to choose a Windows Forms app as per normal. And then moving forward. Now, I did install Visual Studio 2022 over the weekend, so there may be some glitches here. This is 2019 that I'm demonstrating in, though. So this is going to be week 08. Demo, and this is going to be classes 2. This is going to be demo 1. There'll be 2 different demos this week, and so this is going to be the second classes demo. So we're going to go ahead and go create that under .NET 5. That's fine, or .NET 6, whichever is fine. So we'll get a form loaded up. Again, we're not going to do any form design this week. It's all about the coding this week. All right. So we're going to set this as our startup project, and then we're going to go ahead and I'm going to rename this form. Go ahead and rename this form. I got to close the form. All right. Now we can rename the form. Okay. Form main, that's fine. Yes, we're going to go ahead and open that form. I'm going to set a couple of changes like I typically do. The first one will be the text on the form. This is going to be week 8, classes demo 2. And then going to set the startup position as center screen. Okay, so as far as this week goes, we don't need the form itself for this lesson or video. We're not going to use the form at all. So we're just going to go ahead and write all the code in here and get set up and ready to go. So we are going to create a class. So like what we had shown you in week 7, we're going to go ahead and right click on week 8. We're going to say add new class. Okay. I'm going to rename this class, and I'm going to call this class Trooper. Make sure you use a capital for names of classes. They are, as far as the class style guide goes, it is to start with a capital. So there's the capital T there. It is a class, and we will go ahead and add that. All right, so we end up having to have this user-defined file in which we will go ahead and add our typical things. So we're going to go ahead and add a comment header saying that this is the Trooper class file definition. Okay, the author is in this case me, and the date today is June the 27th, 2022. Right? So that's what we're going to go ahead for our comment header. We'll add a region for the using statements here. We will need to add system.drawing. Okay, so make sure you're adding system.drawing there, and then we will end that region like so. All right, so we're able to go ahead and compact these up. So we've got our Trooper class definition, our using statements, and now we've got our namespace with our class Trooper. Now, as I had shown you before, there's 4 or 5 typical sections which you will have within a class. And so just from a preparation perspective, I'm going to go ahead and create all those regions in advance. So the first one is global variables. I'm going to go ahead and copy the end region so I don't have to keep doing that each time. Then there's going to be the properties. Okay. Then there's going to be the constructors. Like so. There we go. There's going to be the methods, okay? Custom methods, like so. And then inside of the custom methods, I'm going to nest two other regions, being instantiated or instance methods and static methods. Okay, like so. All right, so that way we have the ability to differentiate between methods that are included in instantiation and methods that are not, that are actually static in nature. And don't mind me, we'll have my coffee. All right, so now as we've got this set up, we're going to set up a couple things. First of all, we're going to create a list of troopers. So we're going to end up instantiating troopers and the class trooper, and we're going to store each instance of these troopers in a list of troopers. So we're going to go ahead and create a public static list of trooper. Okay. Again, this is going to be the same as the class name. Okay. And we're going to call this troopers just to have a good name. Okay. And this is going to equal, and we're going to instantiate this right away by creating a new list of troopers. And then because we're running a constructor on that new list of troopers, we do need the round brackets. All right. So there we go. We're going to create one more global variable, because what we're going to do is different from what we did with the droids class. In this particular class, we're going to actually have an auto number field. So we're going to create an auto number option inside of this trooper. So every time you create a new trooper, the first one will be trooper 1, then it'll be trooper 2, then it'll be trooper 3. So we're going to create that auto number feature. So as you instantiate, the ID number of the trooper will automatically increment and work perfectly great, which is what you have those features in database and those kind of things. And so we're going to go ahead and do that in code now. So we're going to create this as a private static. Okay. The reason why is because I do not want this variable accessible to the main program itself. I only want this variable accessible within the class. So I'm going to make that private. It does need to be static because I don't want this copied. I don't want this copied into each instance of the class. I want this to be static, as in there is only one current ID, and it's going to say, okay, the next time I create a trooper, this is the number that it's going to be. So in fact, we could go ahead and just say next ID. Let's call it that. Let's call it private static next ID. And that means the next time I instantiate a trooper, this is what the ID number will be. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and now create the properties. We're going to use the shortcut prop tab. Okay. The first one is going to be an integer. Okay. And we're going to call that variable designation. Okay. And that is going to be our auto number field. Okay. So that it will be where we will store the ID number. We're going to call it designation. Then we're going to create a string property called nickname. Oh, gotta hit the tab key. Tab, there we go. Nickname. All right. And that way we're going to be able to assign a name. So if anybody watches or is involved in the Star Wars universe, you know that all the stormtroopers have pseudonames per se, right? So I didn't use the shortcut this time, so now I have to manually type the get and set, but that's okay. All right, there we go. We're gonna go ahead and add the home world. So from what planet are they from? Okay, we're gonna say the date and time of their birth. Okay, so it's going to be just their date, so their birth date, basically. Okay, so that will be, we're going to call that born for birth date. I gotta spell born right. There we go. It's going to be, then we're going to store a string, which is going to be their unit. So they're in red unit, they're in green unit, blue unit. So, I mean, or unit A, unit B, whatever unit they're in. So it's the group of troopers, the subgroup that they're in. All right, we're going to create a Boolean property. So you can create a Boolean property, and this one is going to be is defective. Okay, so this was more towards when troopers were clones, and that the clone may not have worked out properly. So there's a defective. If you know the Star Wars universe, there's a a group of troopers which are all defective, but they're made into a specialist unit. It's pretty fun. So then we're going to add two more properties. They're both going to be colors, and the first one is going to be their hair color. Okay, and the second one is going to be their eye color. Okay, so we always want to have identifying features. So obviously, oh, look at that, mistyping it again. Okay, but there we go, eye color. Okay, so there's our properties. So in this particular case, we're gonna have 8 properties, so a little bit more than we had last time, and a good variety. So we have dates and booleans and integers and off normal types like colors. Okay, so we're gonna use those as our properties. Now, when we go to the constructors, okay, so we go to the constructors. Let's go ahead and build the first constructor. So remember, there are 2 kinds of constructors. The first one is the default constructor, where you basically just have, just instantiate a trooper. Okay, so you're just going to instantiate a trooper. So typically we would have done this like this with just the curly braces on one line, nothing in the curly braces, and that's perfectly fine just the way it is. But in this particular case, because we want to do this auto number feature, I am going to actually put some code inside the default constructor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, when I call the constructor, or when I instantiate a new trooper, I'm going to assign it an ID, okay? And I'm going to use whatever that current ID is. So that global variable we created right here, this private static, and it's called next ID, I renamed it, okay? So next ID. So this static variable, which is going to store whatever the next ID is going to be, we will set that equal to the designation on the instantiation. That's the key part, is when you instantiate, is when you create the trooper, you will automatically assign that designation at that time. It doesn't matter if you know any of the other information. All we need to do is give it an ID value. And not only are we going to use next ID, but we're going to play the little incremental trick where we'll put the plus plus after the name. So what'll happen is the first trooper that's created, it will be a 1, and then after that gets used, the plus plus will take into effect, and this next ID will become a 2. So the next trooper later on will be a 2. We could have done this, but in this particular case, the first one would have been a 2, and I should have changed this to a 0. So that would be, we're starting at 0, and the first one becomes a 1. I'm starting at 1, and I want to use the 1 before I increment it, so we put the plus plus after the fact. And that's all there is to the public constructor, okay, or the default constructor. So I'll go ahead and put my comments in here as the default constructor, okay, using auto increment designation, okay, like so. And there we go. That's the that is essentially the default constructor, okay. Yeah, it's saying there's some non-nullable values here, but that's perfectly fine. We'll be fine there. All right. So then what we're gonna do is collapse this up. What we're then gonna do is go ahead is create the parameterized constructor. Okay. So we're gonna have public trooper, and then we're going to add input parameters for each of the properties, with the exception of designation. We're going to skip designation because designation will be this. It will be using the auto increment. So we're not going to send in a value for the designation when we do this, but we do need to send it in for the other 7 properties. So we're going to go ahead and create a string for nickname. Okay. Going to go ahead and create a string for nickname. Right. We're going to go ahead and create a string for homeworld. Again, you want to use lowercase letters for the initialization here. Okay. A date time for born. We're going to want a string for unit. We're going to want, I'm just going to put a carriage return in here to give more space. A Boolean for is defective, again, lowercase. Like so. Right. We're going to need a color for hair color. And we are going to need a color for eye color. Just like so. Okay. And that's going to be our input parameters for the parameterized constructor. Now, as I've got those parameters there, let me just double check my spelling and everything's good. Okay, so now as I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and add my automated commenting, see that the parameters are put in there automatically, and then we're going to go ahead and do two things. We're going to put a summary in here. So this is the parameterized constructor. Okay, using auto increment designation. The other thing I want to do in this commenting is sometimes the home world, for instance, you could misinterpret that home world. So if you say, where's your home? Okay. Some people will say their home is where their current house is. And some people will say where they're from. So if you're from a different country, you could say home is India or China or Russia or England or wherever the case may be. Or you could say, I now live in Canada, my home is in Canada. So we want to make sure that when future programmers are using this homeworld field, they don't misinterpret, or two different programmers don't have a different idea of what homeworld actually means. So we should probably put some description in here so that there's no misconception or confusion over what homeworld actually is. So when you have things that can be interpreted many different ways, you definitely want to put a description in here such that you're clarifying exactly what this means. Okay, the name that the trooper responds to when communicating. Okay, so what name, Rex or whatever other names there are, right? And those kind of things. So born, we can put date of birth, those kind of things. And where that's going to come in handy is if I go ahead into the main form here and go to view code. I'll just put some code in here. I'll say trooper George equals new trooper. And then when I do this, I can go ahead and use the parameterized thing. And you can see here through the IntelliSense that the nickname is the name that the trooper responds to when communicating. So I'll say, okay, Rex. And then as I go to the home world, it says right here, the home world the trooper was born on. So that really does give the other programmers information about what the intention of these variables were. So that's the idea, is this is where that description comes in, and that's extremely handy when you're working in a multiple programmer environment. Okay, I'm just going to erase that because we're going to not be in the form today, but there we go. So we've got the parameterized constructor. Then as per normal, we're going to go ahead and set the values of the properties. So the designation is the first property, and it's going to be the auto increment area. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do that, and then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing we've done before, where we're going to say property equals input parameter, and we'll go ahead and do that for the other 7 properties. Okay, like so. We just finish this up. Born equals born, unit equals unit, member in capital on the left, lowercase on the right, is defective equals is defective, hair color equals hair color, and eye color with a capital E equals eye color with a small e. There we go. And there's our parameterized constructor. And in addition to it, we have our auto increment in here. And because next ID is static, okay, because we made it static, it will go across all troopers. So in other words, it doesn't matter. It's not stored in the individual trooper. It's stored in the main prototype class, so that it will always be incrementing as we go. And we'll show you that in practice on Thursday. Okay. All right. So now we've got our constructors in here. Okay. So we've got our couple of static variables, our list of troopers. We've got our static integer for our auto increment. We've got our 8 properties set up. Okay, you can see that there's 2 references for designation because the default constructor uses designation. Okay, I also want to set some defaults. You see this green squiggly? When I mouse over it here, it says, okay, there's some properties here which are non-nullable. So we probably want to set up some defaults here. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to also inside of the constructor or so, we're going to go ahead and do this default. So I'm going to call set defaults like so, and then I'm going to go ahead and create that as a as a method. Now I want this to apply to each instance of the class depending on where I've called it from. So I'm going to put this in the instant method, so you're able to call it anytime you want. This is going to be a private void function. All right. So, but you're able to use that throughout. So we're going to go ahead and again, I'm going to go ahead and copy from this constructor here because it's basically almost the same. Okay. So I'll paste that in here. I'm not going to do the designation because that only should happen in the constructor. Okay. So because this designation is now going to be read-only, you will not be able to change this designation. Once you give it an ID value, that is its primary key. That's its identification, and it will never change. Okay. But for these other things, we want to go ahead and make sure that we've got some information in here. I'm not going to bother with the born. Okay. Because doing dates and that kind of stuff is thing. I think it's actually, you know what? Let's see if we can remember how to do this off the top of my head. I think it's going to be equals new date time dot today. I think. Or in here, I say today. I say date dot today. There we go. And I think I go brackets. Gets the current date. Okay. So, actually, you know what? I don't think I need to use constructor. I may be just be able to do that. Yeah, there we go. That's how we have to do it. Okay. String defective. We're gonna assume that they're not defective, and we're gonna use their gray as the default here. Okay. Mike Gainsborough, gray. Okay. Is defective equals false. Is that small f? There we go. And this is going to be color dot gray. So we've got a set defaults, which is going to set those up, and then the non-parameterized controller can go ahead and set the defaults for all of the properties except for the auto increment property called designate. Okay. So we've got that set default set up. Perfect. All right, so moving on. Let's go ahead and put some commenting in here. Sets the default values for all properties except the designation. Okay, so we'll go ahead and collapse that up. There's our set defaults, like so. Now we're going to go ahead and create some more tools. So now it's the time where you're going to start to set some tools and to be able to build some tools that you can apply to these troopers. Now, set defaults is a good instance specific method. We could come up with some other ones like change your nickname, set defective, dye their hair, those kind of things. Those are things that will specific, or change units. So this trooper is going to change units, those kind of things. So let's do a change unit one. So we can go ahead and go private void change unit. Okay, and we're going to receive an integer being the designation, so we need to know which trooper is changing unit. So we're going to have the int designation, and then we're going to go ahead and have a string being the new unit, like so. So the first thing we have to do is we have to find a trooper, because all we're sending in is trooper 7. But we can't just go into our list and say, oh, get trooper 7. We need to be able to find that trooper. So we actually have a trooper object, okay? So that's where we're going to build our first static method. We'll come back to this one in a second, but I'm trying to lead into, okay, why would we need to have this? So that's one thing. So we might have a change unit thing, and let's actually make this public so that we can call that from the user form. So public void change unit. So a trooper's moving from red unit to blue unit. All right, so we say which trooper it is and what their new unit is. But when we find and get the designation, we need to go find the actual trooper itself. The actual trooper itself is going to be stored in this list of troopers, right? So that's where we're going with this, okay? So what we need to do is we need to create some static methods, okay? And in this particular case, we're going to return a trooper. So it's not going to be void, it's not going to be an integer. We're going to return a trooper, and we're going to call this find trooper, and this is going to receive the designation, okay? So we're going to receive the designation. Based on receiving the designation, okay, we will go ahead and return a trooper, okay? So we're going to go ahead and say, we're going to go ahead and be careful with instantiating troopers here, because we don't want to instantiate a trooper, okay? But what we want to do is we want to go ahead and say that we have a trooper as found trooper, okay? And we're just and then we're going to go ahead and say return found trooper, like so. Okay, and so what's going to happen is if we go ahead and, can we say equals no? Yeah, we can. Okay, so this is going to be sort of a trick to work around. So what we're then going to do is go through the troopers in the troopers list, like that. So for each trooper, T in troopers, okay, we're going to say if T dot designation is exactly equivalent to designation, okay, and I think we don't actually need we actually don't need the 3, just 2 is fine here. So if that equals the equivalent, we're going to go ahead and right away return T, okay, which will exit which will exit this function altogether, and that. But if we never do find that trooper, it will return a null value. All right, so we will have to handle those null values on the other side, but this little routine. So now what I want to show you is a trick that you have with these generic lists. So one of the topics is collections, and we're going to show you more of this next week. But a trick you can do with this particular for each statement here is you can actually shortcut this, because generic lists have a built-in feature, okay? So as long as that trooper actually exists, we actually don't need any of this. What we can do is we can say return trooper. Okay, we return troopers.find, okay? And we can use arrow notation, okay? So arrow notation is something that some of you have maybe run into before, okay? But what it is it means you're going to use T. So the find will do a for each statement inside of it. So when you do a find method, it will do a for each statement. It will name each one of them T, exactly the same as what I've done right here, okay? And it's going to say put this T into this expression, okay? And when that expression comes out to be true, we have found it, okay? And it will return it, just like so, okay? So that's sort of the idea here, all right? And that's sort of the idea. So we will go ahead and do this. So this is a really good shortcut. Essentially what happens is this one statement does all of this. They're basically exactly the same, okay? So I'm going to comment out this long way of doing it, but just so you understand what is actually happening in here, this statement is essentially doing this, okay? So there it is. So this find trooper is one line of code, which is pretty cool. But this is what it's actually doing, right? So we've got a find trooper. So this will return an actual trooper itself. So when we go back to this change unit, function, we can go ahead and say, hey, trooper, and we'll just call it troop, okay, is equal to find trooper, okay, and we'll send in the designation, okay, exactly like that. So what happens is we receive the designation for which the trooper we want to change. We will take that trooper designation, send it into find trooper, which will convert from an integer basically to a trooper with all the properties involved. So we go into the list of troopers and we find that trooper and it gets set as troop. Now what we have to do is just say that troop.newUnit, troop.unit is going to equal new unit. And that's it. It's done. So we had to go ahead and find that trooper in the list and then set its unit to the new unit. And that's it. That's all we had to do. So although when I was describing this, it may have sounded big and complicated, it's actually not that bad. And we put this find trooper in a separate function because there's going to be many reasons for us to go ahead and find a trooper based on the designation. It's basically like select star from table where primary key equals blah. Okay, so we're going to use this a lot, right? So select from table where primary key equals a specific value. So just like in database, in classes and objects and that, you still need the same kind of search things. So we're going to build one for ourselves. So we just built select star from troopers where primary key or designation equals the designation that we're asking for. So pretty cool that we just built that tool for ourselves. Okay. And this is going to be in static because this is looking through the list of troopers, and this is not static because it applies only to the current trooper. Okay. Now that being said, remember, let's actually go backwards for a bit. Did anybody catch the mistake that I've made? Okay. The fact is when I call change unit, I'm going to actually call this change unit on an existing unit. So because I'm calling this, it's not static. I'm calling this on an existing unit. So I don't need this, right? Because I'm already on a unit. So what actually ends up happening is this does need to be static because I'm actually having this run and asking for the designation and going through the list. So this is actually static. What I could do, and let's see if this overload works, okay? I could make another one that's not static, send in one with a different designation this time, okay? That doesn't ask for the designation. It just goes ahead and uses the current one. So this is one where we don't know which trooper we're going to change the unit for, so we have to send it in, and we have to then look through the list of troopers, find an actual trooper, and set its unit. But this one, not being static, basically is being applied to the current trooper. So I just have to say unit equals unit because this unit will be the property for the current trooper. right? So I'll say like my trooper dot unit, my trooper dot change unit equals new unit. I mean, you could easily just say my trooper dot unit equals new unit, and that would not have to call a whole function and everything. But we're trying to show you the difference between static and non-static and functionality of tools that you can build for yourselves. So that's really cool. Okay. So next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that we also have the idea that when we're creating units, we want to make sure that, okay, are there duplicates? Are the primary keys being duplicated? Are those kind of things happening? So we might want to say, okay, let's go ahead and return a single unit. Or let's say, are we duplicating a unit? Does this unit already exist? Those kind of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a public static, okay, list of string, okay. We're creating a public list of strings, okay, and we're going to call this get unique units, okay. So what happens is this: we're going to have a form that has a bunch of troopers on it, and some troopers may be in red unit, some troopers may be in blue unit, some troopers may be in green unit. There could be 12 in blue, 8 in red, 5 in green. But what I want is just a list of all the units. So I just want red, green, and blue. So I don't care that there's 12 in red. I don't want red repeated 12 times. So basically what I want to do is just get a unique. So this would be the equivalent of a distinct statement in SQL. So select distinct unit from troopers, right? So if there were 12 troopers with red, red would only be returned once. So that's what this is. This is the equivalent of a distinct statement in SQL. So public static list of strings. So I'm going to return the list of the units, and they're just strings, right? And we're going to go ahead and set this up as static because it's going to apply on the entire list. Okay. We do need to have a return variable, so we will create a list of string, okay, being return list, and this is going to equal a new list of string with a constructor, right, like so. And then we will go ahead and return list, okay, return list, like so. So then what we want to do is we want to iterate through all the troopers, okay, and if the trooper that we're currently looking at exists in our if the string of the unit, let me start again. We're going to iterate through all the troopers, and we're going to look at the unit specifically. And if that unit already exists in this return list, we won't add it. But if it doesn't exist in the return list, we will go ahead and add it. So we're going to go ahead and say for each trooper T in troopers, okay, we're going to go ahead and say if not return list. So another option of the collections is contains. So does the return list contain something already? And we're going to say, does it already contain the T unit? Okay. So unit may be red. Okay. So the current troopers unit could be red. We're going to say, hey, does the return list contain red? If it does not contain, I put this exclamation here, if it does not contain, then we will go ahead and go return list dot add T dot unit, like so. Okay. Pretty cool. And not only that, but because this is sort of bad habit not to put these curly braces in here, but I want to show you that you can do that as long as there's only one line of code. Okay, if there's only one line of code in the for each statement, you don't need the curly braces. And this line right here, whatever I do right here, will not be included in that loop. Right? But you can only do this if there's only one line. Okay, so I would say for a beginner programmer, it's probably good practice to make sure you put the curly braces in there. Okay, just so you don't miss it. But the same is true with the if statement. I don't need to put the curly braces around this part if there's only one line of code. Okay. So I'll leave one as one line of code and leave the other one with a curly braces, just so you can sort of visualize. Sometimes when I do too many shortcuts, beginner students get confused too easily. So let's go ahead and show you both ways, and there you go. So this is sort of the idea for each trooper and troopers. If the unit of the current trooper as we iterate through is in the return list, or specifically is not in the return list, then we will go ahead and add it to that list. So red will only get added once, for instance. So there's another method that we created that's for static. We could also say, hey, we're creating a new trooper and we want to manually put in the designation. But if we're going to manually put it in, we want to make sure that we're not duplicating the designation. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go ahead and say, okay, does this trooper exist? So we're just creating a bunch of tools for ourselves that we can write a program against later. So for instance, public static Boolean, we're just going to return true or false. Does this trooper exist? Yes or no. We're going to send in a designation. So is this designation already used? We're going to use this shortcut method, this arrow notation method that I showed you up here. Okay, which remember, essentially it does this. Okay, but the difference is rather than doing a find, which returns a single trooper, we're going to use a find all this time. Okay, so we're going to use return. We're going to do this in one line, so but bear with it. So troopers dot find all. Okay, so we're going to find all. Now we don't really need a find all here, but we're going to use it just so I can show you that it exists. Okay. So we're going to say T, we're going to send T into the comparison, which is going to be T.designation. This is going to be troopers. That's why the find all is not working. Okay. So this is going to be T.designation is equivalent to the designation we're receiving. Okay. And once you're done find all, it will be a list of troopers. Okay. So I can then use .count, okay, like that. So if the count, if I go through the entire list of troopers and I find at least one with that designation already, so it's greater than 0, it's going to return this comparison right here, which is the count greater than 0 or not? So true or false. So this is a fairly complex one line of code, but it essentially does the combination of this for each loop and this adding to the list as we go through here. Okay, so this trooper exists find all method, which is pre-built into generic lists, allows you to find all the troopers inside this troopers list where this comparison exists and works is true. So any trooper found where these two things are equivalent will be added to a list of troopers automatically, which is what the find all returns, a list of troopers. Okay, and a list has a count property which you can compare to 0 as an if statement, and since an if statement returns a Boolean, this entire thing returns a Boolean. So my return statement is returning a Boolean, which is the return type of my function. It's pretty cool when you get to see it at that level. Okay, essentially this one line of code is doing the equivalent of this and this all together. Okay, these are some of the powerful things that languages like C# and Java have in them, and you'll get to know Java a little bit more as you go through into your object-oriented programming courses. You will do Java. Okay, so really cool. Okay. All right, so I think that I've got almost everything I want. I want one more thing, though. One more thing, and that's because when we go to use this class either this week or next week, we need some default troopers. We want to be able to create some troopers so that we can test by. So I'm just going to create a temporary function, public static. Okay, it's going to return a list of troopers. Okay, and it's going to be called get sample troopers. So essentially, again, remember that every time we test, the further into the program we go, we need a list of troopers to do the testing. Otherwise, we have to type in a bunch of sample data before we can test later parts in the program. So I'm going to go ahead and create this. I'm going to go ahead and create this function that's just going to be like a testing function. We'll disable this function before we go live at some time in the future. Okay. But we're going to go ahead and create this for testing purposes. Okay. And we'll go ahead and return that return list. And in between this, what we're going to do is we're going to say return list dot add, and we can create a new trooper and use it on the fly. So we're going to go new trooper. Okay. Like so. You can go ahead and create troopers like that. Okay. You can put the constructor inside of something else. You don't always have to have the constructor being on the right of an equal sign. Like trooper, my trooper equals new trooper, right? You can just create it. And this way you don't store a variable with that trooper in it, even temporarily, because that uses up memory and takes time. So this, just create the trooper and add it to the list directly. You don't waste time creating a variable, storing that in memory, and then editing it, and then moving it into the list. You can just do it all in one step. So we're going to use the actual parameterized constructor, okay, which will require some information here. So we're going to go ahead and do it like this. Actually, I'll put in my real birth date. There you go. You guys, I don't care. You guys know how old I am. Doesn't matter to me. I'm using the. Please note that I'm using the IntelliSense here to know what I'm entering. So right now I'm entering the unit, so blue. Okay, and when I go here, it moves over. Now it's is defective. So I'm going to say I'm not defective. Okay, and then I'm going to say my hair color is brown. Okay, and my eye color is also brown. Okay, if you hadn't noticed, my eye color, my eyes are brown. Okay, like that, and then semicolon. So I can go ahead and, I need two brackets at the end. There we go. Okay. So I can go ahead and instantiate a trooper, put in its parameters, and add it to a list all in one step. Okay. I'm just going to copy this down a couple times so I can create a few. Okay. We'll go ahead and create Rex. I don't know where Rex is from, but I'm going to say he's from Endor. I'm going to make sure I spell it right because I want to, we're going to say 2062. He's born in the future. Okay. I think Star Wars is pretty future. He's going to be a member of Red Unit, false. Rex actually has black hair and blue eyes. Okay. And then we'll create Ugly, who's one of the defective clones. Right. Hoth nude bait time. Let's put in a year of 2053. 1122. I'm just making up some numbers here. We'll also put him in blue unit, so we have two from blue unit. He is going to be defective, okay? And he's gonna have yellow hair, okay? And he's gonna have red eyes. Okay, there you go. So I'm just creating 3 for now. That's fine. You can add as many as you want, depending on what you're trying to test and what you're trying to do. But there we go. So we have the ability to create a list of troopers and then return a list of troopers to the user interface. So we actually again end up getting this list of troopers coming through. Okay, so we can go ahead and have a list of troopers to start with if we want to do that. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and leave it there. So just in summary today, a couple of things. We do have the idea of creating these global variables. Most of the time, your global variables will need to be static. Okay, we're setting up our properties. We changed one of the properties today to sort of introduce an auto increment, which is extremely easy, just storing an integer, and then every time you instantiate a new one, you assign the current value to it and increment it. So the next time you instantiate, next ID will be the next number. Okay. And you do the same thing in all of the constructors. So both the default constructor and the parameterized constructor needs to follow that same pattern. One thing to note, if you're storing this in a database, obviously using a next ID and always starting at 1 will not work, because the next time I run the program, I'm going to start at 1 again. We will handle that another day, where we look at the current list of troopers stored in a database or something. We go find what the maximum ID is, and we start from that maximum ID, so we don't end up repeating numbers between running the program one time and running it another time. Right now, every time we run the program, we're going to start over again at 1. Okay, so pros and cons, but baby steps. So right now we're basically saying, how do we do an auto increment? And now we're just doing it for each run. So it's really simple. You have a static variable being stored, and every time you use it, you increment it by 1. Like it is really that easy. Like it's not overthink. But understanding what's happening behind the covers is pretty important. In fact, there are some quiz questions on this exact topic. Okay. And then we got ahead and created the 2 constructors. We went through and created a couple of methods which were to be applied to each individual trooper. And then we created some static methods, which are tools that we're going to use for another day. So for instance, get a list of sample troopers so we can have some testing data. Change the unit as same as what we did for the non-static version, but we created a static version where we don't know, where we need to receive the designation in order to change the unit. Okay, this one will change the unit for the current one. This will change the unit for any one that I specify. Go ahead into the list and find a specific trooper. Okay, because we're going to have to edit troopers. So before you can edit a trooper, you have to find it so you can populate the screen. Now you can have a trooper, you can edit that trooper in the user interface. Okay, so finding a trooper is something we're going to use all the time. Getting the unique units, we're going to create a list, a drop down. So show me all the troopers in blue unit, and it will only show the blue unit, or show me all the troopers in red unit. So in order to do that, we need a drop down list of all the current units. So we're going to go ahead and have this list. So select distinct unit from troopers type of an idea. And then we're going to say, hey, does the trooper exist? So I can say, hey, if I'm trying to save a trooper, am I creating a duplicate? Or better yet, I want my editor to double. I'm going to create an editor for editing troopers, but I also have to have a box for adding new troopers. If I want to use the same input form for adding troopers and editing troopers and only having one save button, that save button needs to be able to determine, hey, am I adding a new one here? Or am I editing an existing one? And so knowing whether the trooper exists or not is going to be important in the future. So when we create these classes, we also create a bunch of tools for ourselves that we are going to use in the future. All right, so heads up, we will have an in-class exercise on Thursday. So make sure you are there on Thursday, and hey, have a great couple weeks. Couple days, sorry, not couple weeks, couple days, and we will see you in the classroom on Thursday. Have a good one.